Rademaker, Prescription for Your Transformation, real people, real conversations, and real success. And had a little hiatus there for a while. We went on an incredible trip to the South Pacific, did some incredible humanitarian work with a bunch of wonderful humanitarian leaders, legacy makers and destiny builders. And now I'm back, and we have some new programming that's coming up, and the idea is to be able to broadcast live to 3 different platforms, YouTube included, with Facebook as well as Periscope. And so today is about the story that we talk, the story that we tell ourselves, the story that we tell others, but predominantly that story that we tell ourselves. And rarely do I find a book that I really gravitate towards. And one of the earliest books that I really enjoyed was The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, because it was a way of presenting a story of someone's life, of a way to be, that really had a very profound effect on me and allow me to appreciate through the eyes and the experiences of someone else, how my life was being lived by me and what kind of changes that I could make. And today I'm delighted to be introducing Gregg Korrol, who has written a very similar book to that. And it's much more relevant to the times today. The Prophet is back in the medieval times in the Middle East. This is about our life today. And so I really want to thank Gregg for joining me today. And we're going to be talking about stories.
Thanks so much, Bart.
So by way of introduction, you've got an extensive background in education and philosophy and psychology and all those things. And you're also an educator today, which I think is awesome, and have a lot of respect, particularly for someone of your acumen, someone who has a perspective on life that really can enlighten so many people, not only the young, but also the older. And so I really want to, put that out so that people can appreciate the kind of individual that you are, the kind of books that you have written, and I guess in the process of writing as well. But The Gifted Storyteller is a very special book. And so I'd like to talk about, first of all, as we were talking just before the show, the stories that we tell ourselves, and I could very much relate to that. That was my past. And I want to hear your perspective on
that. Yeah, so The Gifted Storyteller has a lot to do with, a lot of people think it has to do with the stories, telling a story or translating a story for somebody, but really it has to do with the story we tell ourselves. As somebody once said to me, every day you wake up with yourself and every day you go to sleep with yourself. And in between those 16 or so hours, you're basically chattering in your mind. You're talking to yourself. You're telling yourself a story. And that story is driving your life. So again, The Gifted Storyteller is really about the story you're telling yourself. The reason I term it The Gifted Storyteller is because it's fascinating to me that, a bunch of people, and I know we've all experienced this, where you share a situation or you're sharing a situation with somebody or an observation with somebody, and they have a very different take on what's going on. It could be as, I don't want to say simple, but it could be something as simple as 10 eyewitnesses to a car accident and all 10 people telling a slightly different version. I mean, in a sense, nobody's wrong because everybody from where you're standing, so to speak, standing physically, but also standing in your mind, see things in a certain way. But yet that accident was the same. It's just the way in which you perceive it that's different. And that's kind of what life is like, where things are going on and you have to decide, what does this mean? What am I seeing and what does it mean to me? And another way I phrase it is I use the analogy of optical illusions a lot to describe it. And I'll just quickly throw something up to the screen from the book, which is an optical illusion I use, which I'm sure everybody's seen before, which is basically the concept of a vase or two faces. And I use that because that's kind of what life is like. In other words, the two faces are present, as is the vase. Neither one is wrong, but where you tend to focus is going to give you a very different story to tell.
And in that particular case, I'm sure that someone would see two faces, one happy face and one angry face, right?
Very possibly, yeah. But it's that moment in when you choose to see what you see, and then the story you create around what you're seeing, that really defines your whole life. There's a small moment there between when stimulus comes in, whatever it is, whatever you're sensing of the world, and then when you have to respond to it. And it's in that moment of space where so many decisions are going on, and they happen like that. You're not even aware of all the decisions you're making. And that has to do with everything from your background, the way you were raised, the friends you have, your family, your experiences. All of that feeds into each moment. And it's why we respond or react in a certain way.
And what's interesting, and we were briefly talking about this earlier on, is why the story, and I like to share my perspective on it, or my personal experience on it, and have you make any comments or adjustments, or what your thoughts are on it, because as you said, we all have different perspectives and different ideas and understandings on these things. But in my personal experience in the past, and with my understanding that we are creatures of meaning. Everything has to have a meaning, because that meaning then gives us that certainty in life that something is the way that it is. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't matter. And then my personal experience with my personal background, which I was uprooted a lot. I grew up in 5 different countries. And so I underwent a lot of different changes. And so there was a lot of uncertainty in my life. And so I discovered that I had many internal monologues, or even dialogues perhaps, about what was going on in my life, because I was trying to understand things. And at times when I was not happy with something, or at times where there was some sort of anxiety, and you pointed out earlier on that sometimes we do this just to protect ourselves, that we start having this story so that we comfort ourselves, we protect ourselves, we give reason for whatever it is that's not happening the way that we want to in life. But the truth is, and what you point out, which I think is so clear, is that as long as we're stuck in our story, then we take away that opportunity for us to grow. We take away the opportunity for us to become who we really want to become. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts about why so much of this storytelling is happening. We know that it comes from, as you mentioned, from different people, your friends, your family, and the environment. But why is it that you do the story, and what are some of the negative outcomes of that?
Okay. Yeah, I think the story piece is something we're kind of born with. Something you kind of said, making meaning of the world. And it serves us pretty well at a point. Because if you think about it, a baby enters the world and has no concept of where he or she is. And as they're growing and as they're experiencing, they have to make meaning of things. So it's the type of thing where they may know what a dog and a cat is, and then they see some creature, and well, it has 4 legs and it has a tail and it goes woof, so I guess that's a dog. And we start grouping things together and trying to make meaning. And I think that's such a present part of our early experience as we enter this world in our childhood, naturally, and we have to. It's a wonderful thing. But it serves us, I think, to a point where we get lost in the fact that we're making meaning that may not be our choice. So, for example, it's like, if you look up at clouds, what do we all do? We look up at clouds, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, I see a turtle. Hey, I see a this. Hey, it naturally comes to us because we have to find some sort of a meaning in what we're doing and what we're experiencing. But I think we get to the point where our stories become almost on replay, like an automatic, that we're not consciously thinking. My daughter is walking by. Maya, just lower the TV a little. Thanks, Dad.
Beautiful name,
it was very sweet. Oh, thank you. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So I think it's so we move from this is necessary to do to now it's become a habit to do it in the same way we've been doing it. A perfect example is somebody I was talking to recently, and I was talking about dogs, and she, like, you could see immediately her whole body changed, her whole body language, her face. She's deathly afraid of dogs, and I was like, "Have you been bit by a dog?" She's like, "I think I might have been." I was like, "So you don't even remember?" And she's like, "No," but she's always had this response to dogs. She can't even be around them. Yet here she is, an adult, 30 years old, whatever the case is, and operating on the story she told herself maybe from 25 years ago, from when she was a child. Maybe she heard a loud dog barking and it scared her. And that was enough to create a perspective of the world.
Right.
But she's still living that perspective. And I think that's where it starts to disempower us, when we're making choices without realizing that we're responding to something that may have been a certain way, maybe even 10, 20 years ago for us, but may not be the case anymore. I think that's where a lot of our insecurities come from, a lot of our fears. And I think many people are seeking or try to hit a point where you kind of want to just put a stop to that and say, what's a better way to do this? And I think so the stories serve us, in some ways protect us, because I can give you a perfect example. Even before I had published the book, I had written the majority of the book and just stopped. And I could not keep going. But when I spent time thinking about it and speaking to some people and actually going through some visualization exercise, I realized I was already afraid. Well, how am I going to even get it out? Who's going to read it? How am I going to find a publisher? Da, da, da. So because I started spinning the story in my head, I put a stop from ever finishing the book, which really was serving to protect me, because it's that old "what if I fail" question. What if they don't like me? What if they don't like what I wrote? What if it's not good enough? What if I'm not good enough? All those stories that we start to create, maybe not as bluntly, but we create them and they limit us from taking chances.
Right. It's what I discovered myself is that I can be very logical, and I can logic myself into anything and logic myself out of anything.
Mm.
And it's the power of the brain to totally come up with ideas, and at any given moment, it would make sense, and in another moment it wouldn't. And so that's the danger of all this storytelling, is that it just keeps you away from moving forward in life, because you will always come up with another reason, a legitimate reason why things are not going to work, and whatever. And so I find that fascinating, that that's actually the case with so many of us. And when we can just begin to have faith and trust and believe in ourselves and how we want to be, then life can be very, very different. And so I'd like to jump into your book, and it's a delightful book, and share with us the beginning, the first part before he goes through his transition. And for anybody who's going to read it, you're going to totally enjoy the book, even if you know what's going to happen right now, because it's so relevant to our lives. It's so relatable to how we live our life, and how angels come into our life to help us learn something. And so, what is that beginning of the book?
So the beginning of the book, basically, you have this character, Michael, who is seemingly very successful in life. He's got a great job. He's independent. He's not relying on parents. He's probably in his mid-20s somewhere, going through a point of trying to figure out his life. He's got certain things taken care of. He's made it through college. He's graduated. He's successful, et cetera, et cetera. But he's hitting a point where he's like, is this it? In other words, okay, so, I think part of that came from, at least in my life, I felt like I always knew, I was going to go to junior high school, college. There was never a question. There was always a definitive plan in the way I was raised. But when I was nearing the end of college, it was kind of like, if you can imagine, like walking up a mountain, and you get to the edge and there's this rickety old footbridge that extends out somewhere. Imagine like a whole degree of fog, and the bridge just kind of disappears. And it was the first time in my life where I kind of hit a point where I was like, I had no clue what was going to come next. And I didn't feel
Right.
prepared for it. I mean, yeah, I've heard the whole you can be anything you want in your life and you can do anything you want in your life. But I don't think I really ever got that. I really ever understood that the difference there was about action. But I'm getting off topic for a second. So anyway, so Michael really is going through this point where he's trying to figure out who he is in life. There's this woman, I should say, that he likes at work and he's very fond of. And he works with some people who are great and some people who annoy the hell out of him, which I'm sure we've all experienced. Um, and again, he's just trying to figure out where he is. He's also going through the loss of his father at this point in time. And the book actually begins with his father in a hospital bed and, for lack of better words, on his deathbed, on his way out. It's known right there from the start that, at least as far as his father's life is coming to an end. So he's dealing with some very real situations that we all kind of deal with at some point, trying to find ourselves, trying to find what's our success, trying to connect with a partner or somebody that you can share this life with. But at the same point, you can get people telling you, oh, you're amazing and you're great and you're this and you're that, but you may not feel that way. Or you may know you have a lot of success and you've made money, or you're connected with a partner, or whatever success is to you, but you don't necessarily feel successful. So I think it's by the third or fourth chapter, then meets a woman in a bar named Jeannie, and of course I use the pun of genie as in a genie in a bottle, which is on the back of the book, but there's no actually genie in a bottle in the book. But um, she meets him and kind of confronts him on the fact that he's daydreaming. So he's at a bar, where you should, if you're theoretically going there, if your point is to go meet people, yet you're in your own head. It doesn't make much sense. And she calls him out on it. She doesn't know him at all, but she sees he's lost in storytelling, which is something that I've done in my life. I'm sure you've done in your life. And it's very obvious when people are doing it, because a lot of times you'll see people mumbling to themselves, or you can see them lost in thought and their hands are actually moving as if they're having a conversation sometimes with somebody. Yet all of it's happening up here. I actually think it was a lot more prevalent before we had cell phones
Right.
because, now, you just look for the earphones and you're like, okay, but if they're Bluetooth, you can't see those either. But, so Michael meets this woman and she really calls him out on the fact that he's storytelling, and the journey continues where she comes in and out of his life over a series of a couple of weeks, and really teaches him some life lessons about the fact that your story is your choice. In other words, a lot of times we blame others for things. We look around for excuses. We look around for reasons why something's happening to us instead of understanding that it's happening from us. Life is a reflection of us. And that's really what Michael's journey becomes. And it is a quick read. It's something meant because people don't really take a lot of time these days to read, or I'm under the illusion that they don't take a lot of time to read. Maybe because I don't take enough time to read, or as much time as I'd like. But I wanted to create something that you can read through and go through and would leave you with a few seeds of thought. And seeds that you spend time with will grow. So if you spend time just reflecting on the book a little and looking at your life and thinking, you're naturally going to start changing a little. You talked about the power of the brain, and the brain is on one hand, it's a very old tool. In other words, it's the same kind of brain that we've been using since caveman days. And we always talk about, fight and flight and how we react to situations in life. But we don't have those same fight issues that we used to have. Maybe depending on where you live in the world, you may. But most likely, if you're in a country where that's, modern, you're not running from a tiger or
Right.
trying to protect your family in certain ways. So we find other fears that serve that purpose, because that part of the brain still has a job to do, which is to protect you. And that's really, again, what the storytelling piece is about. And I think that when you stop and think and stop telling the same story over, because a lot of people, and again, this is from my experience of talking to people, but also with myself, you kind of have the same thoughts almost every single day. You kind of go through the same story, whether you're working a 9 to 5 or whatever your position in life is. A lot of it is the same. A lot of your routine is the same. And I think I mentioned in the book at one point, and this is something I went through, where I literally would like brush my teeth before going into a shower just to break some monotony. I would wake up to classical music versus jazz versus rock, or a buzzing alarm, just to change the day in and day out.
Right.
And that's what's going on in the beginning of the book before he meets Jeannie. It's really trying to make sense of what's going on and how do I get control of this whole thing.
You know, it's interesting what you said, and I think we oftentimes forget this, is that, you know, our brain and our primitive brain, if you will, is geared for survival, and it's geared to find what's wrong in the world around us. And just look at how newspapers work. I mean, they sell by promoting drama, by promoting, you know, horrible things, you know, that grab your attention versus the nice things. I mean, and the truth is that, you know, we really do want to hear the nice things, but we don't give ourselves enough time for that. And geared that way, then we also look around us and see what's wrong. What are the potential dangers? And I think Mark Twain said something to this effect, and I know that I'm changing it, but he says, you know, I expect 1,000 ways of 1,000 terrible things to happen to me every single day, and none of which ever happen. And he said it's in a different way, obviously. And isn't that true with our lives? And how we are also geared that way by our upbringing and what's happening in the world. And for example, our parents telling us you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't be this and you can't be that. So we're looking for all the negative. And what I love, a phrase that, you know, I'm not sure if it came from Tony Robbins or not, but I'm going to give him credit for it. You know, he's saying, you know, what's wrong in life is always available, but so is what's right.
That's right.
And, you know, and I, you know, over the last, you know, few years with all the journeys and the learnings, and I know you've had a tremendous amount of learning in your background as well, you know, I've made that shift. I've made that shift where, you know, a couple of things are happening is being present in this moment and what is real. You know, having faith and just noticing what's around me right now and finding out what is right, and changing the meaning, you know, of whatever it is that it is into something that's great. Also something I learned from Tony Robbins. And so that gives us that opportunity to change the direction as you talk about. And again, this is what happens in the book, right? That, you know, the genie comes in and, you know, helps Michael start looking at things differently and actually start living life, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this also, I guess you and I had a similar experience or experiences or journey in the sense that I became very aware at a point that I was seeing things in a certain way. What's wrong is available, so is what's right. And once I started making those choices, once I started changing my focus to looking for what's good about this, even when somebody would say, okay, we have a problem, you know, there's a whole feeling of negativity associated with the fact of the word problem. It was actually, I think it was, what movie was it? Pirates of the Caribbean, where Jack Sparrow, whenever something would go wrong, and there was always something going wrong, I noticed the fact he'd always be like, that's interesting. And just that change of the word from, you know, oh man, this is a problem versus that's interesting creates opportunity, because an opportunity or something that's interesting affords you the ability to look at it differently. You look at it through different eyes. Going back to the optical illusion example, am I seeing the two faces or am I seeing the vase? And once you start looking at something differently and changing the language around that experience, it gives you the opportunity to be able to find some meaning or something new. And, you know, sometimes things do go horribly wrong, not what we expected. But there are other times when, and sometimes it takes distance. Sometimes it's, you know, hindsight is 2020. but you're still going to learn from it. If you pay close attention, what I found is that the universe kind of gives you the same stuff over and over until you kind of go, hey, I've seen that before. What if I try doing it this way? And it changes. It's almost like one of those, for this silly analogy, but if you remember those books from when we were little, like it's to read the first chapter and it's like, if you want the character to go to this, jump to page 10. And if
Yeah.
you want the character to do this, jump to page
Yeah,
56. That's exactly what it is, except in your mind, you know?
right.
Sometimes it's habit to go in sequential order, but jumping to 56 maybe give you a better story, you know? So,
You know, no, I love what you
yeah.
just said, and I want to spend a little more time on that as well, because in Chinese the word crisis has two meanings, and probably, as you know, in Chinese, words have many different meanings. And the word crisis means, terrible things or opportunity. And I think just by that choice of looking at a situation or event, and quite frankly saying, your worst times can actually become your best times, and only if you can learn from them.
Yes.
And there's that saying that there's no such thing as failure unless you fail to learn. And when you listen to the exponential entrepreneurs, people like DeMontis, and he just wrote a book, Bold. The key message that I got out of that book was fail often, fail quickly, and fail forward. And so failure is not the issue. The problem is not the issue. It's that opportunity to grow. And my epiphany about 2 years ago, when I went on a humanitarian trip to Ecuador, after a lot of other growth and learnings. And what was exciting was I had to share a message and who I was, and I was beginning to understand who I was as a person, who I am being. What is that identity? And I want to focus on that in a moment. But the clear thing that came to me was I celebrate my faults and my weaknesses. And that's the opportunity that I have to simply be aware and recognize what's going on, what I don't like, or what I want to change. So now that I'm able to change those, and it may take a day, may take a week, may take 10 years, but just the fact that you have that awareness, absolves the need for having a story. Logicking yourself, as I like to put it, it's not a word,
Mm-hmm.
but I made it up, is into believing something a certain way just to protect yourself.
Yes.
And so that's why I love what you just shared just now, is that, everything is an opportunity if you choose it. And most importantly, it's the language that we use. And I think we take language very much for granted. And you, obviously being an educator, are much more in tune to that. And so just share a little bit more about your thoughts on language and what people can actually do to fine tune the way that they speak to themselves.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about communication because every word is so vitally important. But I do observe the way people use language, and then language is associated with a feeling. Like if I tell you something terrible happened, on some level you're already feeling something within you. Like terrible has a certain feeling.
Yeah.
So when I hear people talk about 9/11, for example, and call it terrible, that kind of makes sense to me. When somebody says they were stuck in traffic and it was terrible, I'm like, really? Same thing? Like we should use our vocabulary more selectively.
Yeah.
And I think the best analogy, and actually I've written about this in my in the book that I'm writing right now, which is actually a sequel to The Gifted Storyteller. But it's like coloring with a crayon. If you're going to use a blue crayon, the same blue crayon to color your whole picture, you're not really giving it the dynamic that you could. There's thousands of shades of blue. If you had 1,000 different blues, how much more colorful would the sky be, or that ocean that you were drawing? And it's the same with language. If you can use and expand your vocabulary and find words that are more appropriate, not only is it going to change the way you're communicating, but it's going to change the way you're feeling. So when people sit to this, people say things to themselves all the time, like, "Oh, I'm a loser," or "I'm stupid," or "I just can't get it right," or they call themselves shy, or they call themselves whatever. it's not serving them. They may be doing it because it's their way of berating themselves or their way of making somebody else, maybe it's an apology in a sense, oh, I was stupid, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, or whatever the case is. But you're putting yourself down and creating, I mean, every word you have has an emotion connected to it for you. And that's another piece of communication, that your use of the word terrible, going back to that, is going to feel different and have a different meaning than my use of the word terrible. So I'm kind of jumping here again, but when you're communicating with somebody else, it's important to communicate them in their language, not your own. You wonder why you get into so many fights with spouses or with other people. It's because you're talking from your point of view, not from theirs. You're using words that mean something to you in a certain combination, in a certain way, without listening to what the other person is saying. That's why so many people, like, and I'm generalizing, but I'm sure everybody listening can agree. At some point, you've had somebody say, "You're not listening to what I'm saying," because you're not. You're listening to what you're thinking. You're taking their words, giving it your own meaning, as opposed to hearing what they're trying to get across to you. All of these factors, and that's why communication is so incredibly, there's a lot of depth to it. So going back to the example of the crayons, it's what your job with communication should be is to expand your vocabulary, expand your crayons, expand your palette, get as many shades of blues, reds, oranges, yellows as you can, so you're using the right crayon for the right moment. Don't say words, don't use one word to frame experiences, some that are here and some that are here, because they're not the same, yet they're creating a feeling within you. Something you mentioned before about the brain being, we're talking about the brain being an old system. I mean, scientific research has shown, I mean, when somebody pokes you with a needle, a certain part of your brain lights up. The interesting thing is when you're under stress, that same part of your brain lights up. It's the same exact part that's associated with pain. Language and emotion have the same effect in your mind as a physical pain. And you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware that you have other options. I mean, where do you begin? You really start listening to other people, more so than listening to yourself as you're having a conversation. I spend a lot of time when I'm talking to people trying to pick up on their vocabulary. If somebody uses the word awesome a lot, when I'm talking to them, I try to make sure to use the word awesome instead of great that I might use, because I want to make sure I'm speaking to them in their language. I think that was tremendously helpful in my own relationship, and
Right.
so many of the relationships I had is sitting back, and it's hard. It's hard to listen because a lot of times somebody will start talking, and you're immediately thinking, well, what am I going to say? Or you grab onto something, and you're thinking about how you're going to respond to it. Meanwhile, this person's already 5 miles down the road in a different conversation, and you're not even with them at all. And that's when you start responding or trying to act like you heard what they're saying, and you're just not there, and they know it.
It's interesting, and I've been writing, lots of notes on all the things that you shared because they're so relevant. And I'm going to see if I can, backtrack on all the amazing information that you just shared. When people like themselves, and I know you're familiar with neurolinguistic programming, and one of the things that you do with that is when you communicate in the same way, the same tone, same words, then you're actually very much effectively communicating at an unconscious level. And that is so key in having solid relationships, is that when you can communicate in that kind of way. And for anybody listening right now, look into neurolinguistic programming. There's such wonderful work, and hopefully we'll see that a lot more in schools, because it's also that communication with ourselves and using the right kind of language to help us, create and design, if you will, the life that we desire. And language is such a key thing. And unfortunately, in today's world, people say there's a breakdown in communication, and it's such a cliche in a sense. And it's a cliche in a sense because I don't believe that people understand, as you put it, the depth to it all. And people stay at very much at the superficial level of communication and just, take for granted that there's so much lost within that communication. It's so important. There's a great technology or communication technology, I don't know if you're familiar with it, It's called Imago, and IMAGO, and it's something that was created by Harville Hendrix, a great relationship coach. He wrote the book "Get the Love That You Want," Harville Hendrix, and he talks about how we fail communication, and it teaches a program that helps you communicate, because that is so important. But now we're digressing a little bit. I just wanted to say one thing and wrap up on language. Is that there's also a great book out there called Verbal Advantage, and it really helps you get into the kind of language. But one thing that I do in coaching, I learned this from one of my mentors, Steve Linder from Strategic Brain, is that whenever I start a coaching call, I ask my client, tell me 10 great things about you that are not achievement related. And it's interesting, in the beginning, it's very hard for people to actually come up with 2, let alone 10. But talk about, I'm a great dad, I'm honorable, I have integrity, I have honesty, and I'm a loving person, I'm a caring person. And so all these attributes, and I think a big challenge that we have oftentimes is we actually don't know who we are, and we can't define ourselves using the right kind of language. And so then we create all these stories to kind of, soothe ourselves, to protect ourselves, because if we were just in absolute alignment with our power, with our essence, then, we'd be very present. And I think that's what you relate in the book, as him becoming much more present to the world around him, and so that he can really relate to all the wonders and the gifts that happen in life.
It's that's one of the things I mentioned, because when you're lost in your stories, or when you're not paying attention to what's happening, there's so many moments you're missing right in front of your face. And I mean, it could be something as simple as seeing a beautiful flower as you're passing, on the street, but it could be grand, like meeting the person of your dreams too. Like, if you're elsewhere, you're not here. And
Right.
being present and being here, it's not always easy, because we're always thinking, we're always working, which is a habitual thing too. But being present allows you the freedom to make choice. Again, when you're in those conversations, or when you're doing your thing in life, if you're lost in the story, or lost in your old story, you're not even telling the story of who you are right now. So again, I'll use the example from earlier with the woman and the dog that I was mentioning. She is already blocking herself from the opportunity of getting to pet a dog, or get that feeling or sensation of what it's like. I mean, dogs are the most loving creatures in the world for the most part. So she's because she's not present, she's operating on an old story. She can't even accept and allow life to happen right now. It's we do this in many ways. The dogs are, a simple example, but there are so many fears, and there are so many things that hold us back from going after what we want, that if we can be present, we find, or at least I've found, that I don't know if you want to call it just like you're tapping into your subconscious, or you're just tapping into energy, whatever the case is. I just find things show up a little
Yep.
more than I had previously noticed. Even something as simple as thinking about something. Like, this is a perfect example. I was actually, I think it was on Monday, I was saying to somebody, I haven't done any interviews recently. Um, I need to get more. Tuesday morning, I woke up to your email. Hey, Greg, you available for an interview this Thursday? I didn't do anything except think, hey, I need something. So I sent out an intention, and whatever, the way things work, it showed up. It's a simple-ish example, but I've had a couple of those this week. And as they come up, I think it's important to take notice of it, because it reinforces that ideology that if you are present and you do request, things come your way.
Yeah, and you mentioned that in your book. You mentioned, how the universe conspires to give you what you ask, and that requires you being present in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I use a few examples to talk about presence, and really just interactions with other people, and to be less harsh, not only of yourself, but of others. And I kind of use the analogy of, I think you said you read the part about the ocean.
Right.
Right, where basically it's like if you think about an ocean, the way I think about life is just like I feel like it's just one big ocean, and we're all these individual waves that rise up and at some point just crash back down. Sometimes the waves are angry, sometimes the waves are subtle, sometimes the water's crystal blue, sometimes it's a raging storm. You have to go through that. But what I also try to point out in that is that if you're a wave and you think about it, what's affecting you? Everything from gravity, the pull of the moon, the wind, the fish that are swimming underneath, all of these things are happening that wave is not subject to knowing about. And that's
Right.
kind of when you see a face walking, somebody, you're walking down the street and somebody's walking towards you, they have a whole ocean going on within them too. They have a whole background story. They may be in not good health. They may be in great health. They may have just had an issue or an argument. They may have just had the best day ever. We don't even know, but we make these snap decisions upon people and then respond to the stories we're creating about the other person.
Yep.
And the more we do this, especially with the people that are closer to us, the more we're not even talking to them anymore. We're talking to our belief about who they are. And I think that's why a lot of relationships, when they end, you usually have one person saying, "We don't talk anymore. You don't even know who I am," because you're not even responding to who they are. You're responding to your belief of who they are,
And
which may or may
that,
not be true anymore.
yeah. And again, that's judgment. And what I like what you said when the Pirates of the Caribbean, which is so relevant, is the word that you used, which is interesting. And interesting is a word of just curiosity. It has no particular energy in any kind of direction. And I was very fortunate to be working with Robert Diltz and Mitchell Stefko, who are leaders in NLP and in masterminding. And one thing that I learned from them was that when any kind of disturbance happens around you, and this is kind of sort of based on one of the poems by Rumi, "The Guest House." If you get a chance to read that poem, it's a great poem. And the strategy that they apply in moments of disturbance, either within yourself or someone else, rather than being critical right away, rather than judging, just start off by saying, "This is interesting." This, be curious. This is interesting.
Hmm.
And then you follow that up with a statement to yourself that says, "This makes sense." Now, it may not make sense to you, but there's a reason for everybody's behavior, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. Most people are very unconscious about their behavior, but there's a reason, there's a strategy. Just like I said, there's a story behind there as well. And then the third step in their process of kind of responding to this kind of situation, an adverse situation, if you will, is a statement that says something needs to be held, heard, or healed. And so there's somewhere within us that something needs to happen, but you're not making a statement as to what it is. You're not making a judgment as to what it is. It's just the fact. It's just that something's going on that needs to be healed in a certain way. And then you ended up, and this is perhaps where I came up with my epiphany ultimately is, welcome into my home, of life. And so welcoming these things in my personal life. And what was very interesting when I went on this trip to Ecuador, rather than focusing on everybody else's behavior and what they were doing, what they weren't doing, because as you know, when you teach kids, right? You teach big groups. There's a lot of dynamics, disparity, things going on. You respond to those things, and rather than being critical or judgmental of other people, find out what's going on in you.
Hmm.
Seeing what the response is in yourself, and there again is that opportunity to make a shift, create a new meaning, to use different language, and that I believe is also what you're saying in your book, is that there are so many ways to do things differently. And so I really want to honor you for the things that you share. And so I have this question for you, because we're talking about strategies, strategies for being present. I mean, what kind of thoughts and ideas do you have about that?
Um, I have a few different thoughts, but in terms of the how, I think a big thing is to stop and take a breath. Like I find that when I'm getting lost in a story or when I'm feeling upset or whatever else, I'll literally stop myself and say, okay, take a deep breath, because breathing makes a difference. Some people say, well, I am breathing. No, take a nice deep breath, relax yourself, take a moment to actually observe where you are. Actually look around the room. If I'm like talking to you right now, even as I'm saying this, I'm kind of doing this. I'm starting to notice the way my body feels in the chair, what my back is leaning against, my glasses against my face, little sounds that are happening around the room. I do that to bring myself back to where I am, to remember that I'm okay, first of all, because I think a lot of people, when we hear problems or situations, we tend to freak out, but you're okay, you know? And another thing I remind myself so much of is that I have been through numerous situations in my life. Everybody has. Everybody's been through their own journey, which has involved difficulties of, for some people, huge proportions, some people lesser proportions, but you have to remember it's all relative because, it's a weird analogy, but the pain somebody goes through in losing a child versus the pain somebody might experience on their prom night, going out to their prom and then spilling juice all over their dress, could actually be the same
Yep.
pain. It's a very interesting thing because it's how you take it. So you have to kind of remember where you are, and then remember that you've been through so many things in your life. And I think the emphasis became, or the change for me happened to becoming more present, is to have more faith in myself. In other words, stop worrying about what am I going to say, what am I going to do, how am I going to handle this. That doesn't mean don't plan for things, but don't worry when you start getting that anxious feeling, and start having more faith and belief in who you are. Something you said earlier when you said you hit a point where you started celebrating your uniqueness or your individuality. The interesting thing is we all have people that we look up to, that are successful or in public eye. And I'll use, singers as a perfect example. That, everybody has singers they love or bands they love, et cetera, but every single one of them says the same thing. Nobody comes out and says, oh, I made it because I copied somebody else. They always said, I made it because I did something different. So the people we admire tend to be people who are celebrating themselves or unique to themselves, yet we're sitting here comparing ourselves and wondering why we're not or why we don't fit in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm not sure if I'm being clear about that.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah. So I think it helps people to really say, screw it. I am who I am, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, whatever the case is. And all of that stuff are labels anyway. They're not even real. They're comparisons. You can't say you're beautiful without comparing yourself to something. You can't say you're ugly without comparing yourself to something. So what if we just eliminated that comparison piece and just were and just be and did the things that we wanted to do without holding ourselves to the expectations of others?
It's awesome that to hear you just say something that I've always illustrated to so many people as to the severity of pain and in the context can be so different for people, and neither is right, neither is wrong. It's just the way that it is. And and the other part is, there's that song, you may remember this, but Bozo's in the Bus.
I don't know it.
Well, it's back in the 60s or early 70s, released by Quadraphonic, and I forget exactly who it was who did it, but it's a song about bozos in the bus that, it goes on to say, wow, there's so many other bozos in the bus. They're or let me rephrase it. There's so many other people that are better than me, and I'm just the bozo. But then everybody's thinking the exact same thing. They're thinking that they're the bozo and everybody else was great. And I love what you said about the comparison. And I think what's important is that we spend so much time comparing ourselves to other people and believe this is what needs to be so that we become something. And you're absolutely right. Let's just believe who we are and give ourselves that permission to be ourselves, give ourselves that permission to have that human experience, But more importantly, the comparison that we make with others is just that place again for opportunity. It's not the standard, but you see somebody who lives in a certain way and say, you know what, I like that. I like the way that they live. So that's what I can ascribe myself to. But he's just as much of a bozo as I am. But I just don't know anything about that. Mm-hmm. The real comparison that we should be making is the comparison in ourselves. How we are growing through time. You've become so much more today than you were 10 years ago. And that's also through your trials and tribulations and challenges and having children and everything else. And wow, look at you right now. I mean, you're an incredible person. You're an incredible human being. And what I like what you said too, and I'm guessing this is probably a bit of a relationship between you and your own father. And you don't have to confirm that or not. But what I like what the father or the genie was saying, that to the son, to Michael, that you're the gift to the rest of the world, that you're that person that's going to make a difference in the world. And I think when we can think in those terms, and this is what I love a lot about the work of Tony Robbins, is our growth and our spiritual contribution, or let me rephrase it, our spiritual happiness comes from our personal growth and how we get to contribute to the rest of the world. And we can only do that if we just accept who we are and how we get to grow and learn from thought leaders like yourself, with new ideas, new insights, and everything else. And that's exactly why I have these interviews, and I'm very appreciative of you, so that people can discover more things that can make their lives better.
I agree. And I think a big piece of the comparison thing is we you have to remember that, let's assume you're sleeping 8 hours, you're awake for 16 hours. Your mind is going for 16 hours. So is everybody else's. What they're sharing is, I mean, if you think about the amount of conversation you have with people, how much time are you really talking to them? If you're having at work, you're getting 5 minutes out of their whole 16 hours worth of mental conversation. You're seeing these little highlights, you're seeing these little points that you're believing to be a certain way, when again, there's all of that. You're taking this much out of this much and forming a story around it. And I think the expression is, you're comparing yourself to other people's highlight reel. And again, that's easy to do, but you really want to put yourself down over it? Like, in other words, is that what's going to serve you best? Because if you think about, I'll use Tony Robbins as an example. I mean, I've never met him. I mean, I've obviously seen him in person, listened to his lectures and everything else. But is he that much smarter than you? Is he that much greater than you? No, he says it himself. He worked his ass off. Every day he put in the time, he put in the energy, and he built this figure of who the world sees as Tony Robbins. And he continues to. But that's what made him. It doesn't matter, who you are. I think even Beethoven was told by one of his earlier music teachers that he was terrible. Tom Edison, light bulb, was told he was stupid by one of his teachers. Michael Jordan, I think, was thrown off his high school basketball team because he had no skills. I mean, come on. There are so many examples like that, of people who somebody told them whatever, and they just didn't listen to that story. They decided, screw it, I'm going to create that story. And it's even like I just said to my daughter who passed by, I said recently, because she was showing me, like, at the end of the year. So of course she brings home her portfolio of work and she's showing me all the stuff she did, but she didn't want to show me one of the tests that was like a lower grade, like a 60 something. I'm like, it's okay. This is where your learning comes from. If you got hundreds on everything, then you're not learning anything. It's the other stuff. It's the mistakes. It's the failures. That's all the learning. That's all the growth. The rest of it is nice, and we want to see it, of course, but your growth is coming from your mistakes. So it's Robbins and all these other people who made mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake until it became a hit. And allow yourself to fail. Allow yourself to make some mistakes. It's okay. Don't judge yourself after you do it. Okay, I made a mistake. What can I learn from this? What did I learn not to do? What did I learn to do? Which piece of this worked for me? And take that time to reflect and allow yourself that freedom to build, create the story you want to for your life. It's your life. You're not getting another one, not as you at least. Like if there is reincarnation, whatever the case is, you're not coming back as you. You're coming back in some other form or some other way, whatever the case is. So you've got this one shot, and use it. What have you got to lose?
Yeah. And on those wise words, I'd like to wrap it up. We have about 1 minute left, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, give yourself to be human, give yourself to be who exactly you are, have aspirations of becoming more, and living the life by your design and learning from people like Gregg. And so, with that, Gregg, how do people find you? And do you have a website? And what's the name of the book exactly? And where can they get it?
Okay, so I'm gonna just make this easy. So, The Gifted Storyteller. It can be found on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, iTunes. There's an audiobook version because obviously not everybody can sit there and read, but maybe when you're driving to work or you're at the gym, you can listen. The point of The Gifted Storyteller really is to just help you take another step on your journey and improve your life. You can find me at greg@thegiftedstoryteller.com, facebook.com/thegiftedstoryteller. The website is thegiftedstoryteller.com. And that's, if you just Google my name or Google the book, you will find me or you will find the book. I also have on Facebook a bunch of other videos. They're quickies, 5 minutes, and kind of talking about some of the things we've talked about and giving some strategies. I also have a whole series of podcasts that are available on iTunes. Of course, they're free, talking about everything from telling a better story to how to deal with bullies and bullying, and so many different subjects that I think would benefit people in terms of helping them create the story they want to in their life.
Well, thank you so much. That's great. That's a lot of content that people can go through and change their lives. And Gregg, I really want to thank you for today. It's been a great and inspiring conversation with you. And I'm Dr. Bart Rademaker, prescription for your transformation, real people, real conversations, real success. Talking to this amazing author and thought leader and philosopher and educator, Gregg Korrol. Thank you so much. And I'll be back tomorrow.
Thank you, Bart.